Let us continue the history of the First Seminole War from the documents. And I have a lot of them on the subject, so I'll have to move quickly through it. We're going to talk about Fowltown and the destruction of Fowltown. So I have the virtual background behind me is Fort Gaines in Georgia. So that's where our first letter comes from. And let me try to do a share. Okay, this is General Edmund Gaines, and November 9th, 1817, he's writing to the Secretary of War, John C. Calhoun, from Fort Gaines. And he writes that the brigade on the 20th arrived, that marched on the 20th, that arrived last night. So that's like 18 days march. But they are delayed by construction of bridges and causeways from a new road from Montgomery, 186 miles. General Gaines says that the Seminoles will deliver up none of the offenders that killed the settlers that I talked about in previous episodes here, except one Miccosukee chief who professes to be friendly. Major David Twiggs, this Twiggs later on, of course, says that the Indians are determined to attack us soon. He is at Fort Scott right now. Major Twiggs, he is one who will start this episode of the First Seminole War, and he is at Fort Scott. Here's a historical marker near there. Major Twiggs says the Indians are determined to attack us soon. As we tried to cross the Flint River, they say they have 2,700 warriors, but it's not believed. A request to the governor of Georgia for a regiment of infantry and squadron of cavalry has been made. The department quartermaster, Major Vander Inter, is ill, which caused the problem of the payment of the Georgia troops. And much of General Gaines goes on, gives much description of the land down in Florida and what's good for farming. So the Americans definitely have their idea of seizing Florida and taking over and manifest destiny going full bloom. So then, about 2 weeks later, this is on November 21st, 1817, General Gaines again writes to the Secretary of War. He is now at Fort Scott, of course, the marker here in southwest Georgia, now what is Lake Seminole area. He said that the brigade arrived 2 days earlier. He'd sent an Indian runner to Fowltown, and the chief Neamathla, there's Neamathla there, that Gaines had requested Neamathla to visit him at Fort Scott. Neamathla replied that he already sent to the commanding officer all he had to say, and he would not come. He has nothing to say to General Gaines. Neamathla warned Major Twiggs not to cross the Flint River or to cut a stick of wood on the east side of the Flint River. That land was his, and he was directed by the powers above and the powers below to protect and defend it. General Gaines says he sent 250 soldiers under Major Twiggs, who arrived in the early morning to attack Fowltown. Now, Fowltown is probably only about 10 miles from Fort Scott. And to explain things here is that of a creek town, would actually encompass a lot of area. You'd have in the center, of course, the square ground and the community area surrounded by the houses. Surrounding there, you'd have the gardens. People would have area for their livestock. Going in the hood or the woods, you would have hunting preserves. hunting preserves out in the woods, and you'd also have areas where you could gather herbs and medicines. These people do farm and raise cattle, but they also subsist on what they can gather off the land. So the Fowltown would actually by then be considered to cover a large area, considered to be what would be a day's walk from there. So Fort Scott was definitely intruding on the area of Fowltown, but Neamathla told Major Twiggs and General Gaines says, you stay on your side of the river and I'll stay on mine. Don't cross over, don't even cut a tree or a stick of wood on my side of the river. So Major Twiggs takes 250 soldiers and attacks Fowltown. As the soldiers approach, they are fired on without effect. They return fire. Twiggs says that the Indians flee with the loss of 4 warriors, one being a woman that was mistaken for a man. The soldiers chase all the inhabitants away from the village. The men were away at the time, out hunting, so the women was primarily had the old men, the boys, and the women in the village. No, many of the warriors weren't there. So Twiggs moves in, ransacks the place. Among articles found in the village, he goes in Neamathla's hut and finds a British uniform coat and a certificate of thanks from British officers for his help during the War of 1812. Reports are that hostile numbers are more than 2,000 independent of blacks near the Swanee River, or I guess report of 2,000 hostiles against the United States, including 400 black warriors near the Swanee River that have been promised aid by Colonel Nichols and Colonel Woodbine, although the Americans do not believe that. They don't believe the British would make a move at this point. So the Americans kind of have bad timing for everything because they had sent for a boat to come up the Apalachicola River from Mobile, first the Apalachicola River and then to Fort Scott. And it's having some trouble. One is that the weather was not cooperating, it was blowing them around. Also, that they had to avoid pirates that were around Mobile Bay. And once in the Apalachicola River, they had to change to barges that were very slow moving. So the head of the boats of supply with the food and the ammunition and clothing heading to Fort Scott, 3 boats, and they're moving very slowly. General Gaines sends Major Muhlenberg down. He's commanding troops. Actually, he's commanding troops ascending the Apalachicola from Fort Scott. So Major Muhlenberg goes, is kind of head of the supply party, and the supply party has to separate. The water is rising, and you're to aid Lieutenant Scott in his movement. And so the boats that actually separate Muhlenberg is further down the river, and Lieutenant Scott's coming up with 2 other barges, but we'll talk about that more later in the next video. So on November 26, 1817, General Gaines writes to the Secretary of War from Fort Scott again. He says that Lieutenant Colonel Arbuckle, with a detachment of 300 troops, moves to Fowltown. And this was actually 2 days after Twiggs' attack on Fowltown. Goes to the town to attack and maybe even capture some hostages to pressure Neamathla to come into Fort Scott. Well, it didn't work out that way. That was what the first party was doing. So this is the second party. They're coming in to try again. And as they are approached by As they are approaching Fowltown, they are fired on by 60 warriors, and they have a skirmish about 20 minutes. Colonel Arbuckle estimates the loss of 6 or 8 warriors and a greater number wounded. One soldier was killed. It was a fifer or a musician, Fifer Hughes, and they actually named the next encampment after him. So the colonel ransacks the town, takes cattle, the grain stored, all the food supplies, because they figure they're out of food supplies at Fort Scott, so they're going to take what they have at Fowltown. And so they take the supplies and they go up. It says they select a site on the east bank of the Flint River, 4 miles from the town, where they threw up a temporary work as a supply depot in preparation to move against Miccosukee Town, 50 miles distant. And this is where their encampment was. It's mainly Georgia militia at this point. I believe Arbuckle, he went back to Fort Scott. And this is called Camp Hughes, named after the soldier that was killed at Fowltown, Fifer Hughes. And this cannon marks the spot where it was at. And we suspect that Fifer Hughes may even be buried under that cannon. They took the body with and buried him. Built a, I think it's a fortification about 140 feet long, I believe. Can't remember if that's right. But it is now Chason Park in Bainbridge along the Flint River. And you can visit today. They have a cannon commemorating Camp Hughes and another cannon commemorating Fort Scott. And there's also some really good interpretive signs there. And so Fowltown is destroyed. All that you can find today, there's a historical marker on a county road. And in fact, this is after I cleaned it up on the 200th anniversary of the destruction of the town. And that was in 2017, Thanksgiving 2017. I believe all those trees back there are no longer there because of Hurricane Michael about 1 year later. So General Gaines writes to Captain Clinch, who no relation to General Clinch, and Gaines writes from Fort Scott, orders him to embark on 2 covered keelboats. They get some keelboats and reinforce them with oak and kind of make them similar to what they did to old Ironsides. So they have what they called iron keelboats, and to go down and meet Lieutenant Scott and deliver his boat and help give aid as necessary to bring him to the fort. It says, proceed with the remainder of your force downriver and meet with Major Molenberg and stay under his command. And that letter was written on November 30th, 1817. When Gaines wrote those orders, he might not have known that at the time that Lieutenant Scott might have already been dead, but let's save that for the next video. And we'll be back and talk about what we call the Scott Massacre or Scott Battle. Doesn't matter, but we'll give a very interesting read the letter, actual letter of the battle. So I'm going to save that for its own video.